I learned very much from the ground up. I started at the ground, being actually in the houses, doing the repairs, learning what the homes are consisted of. And then I worked my way up to actually learning how to run the business, run a real estate rental business.
Hey guys, let me tell you about Foliolens. We landlords fear complaining tenants, fast turnover, bad reviews and negative ROI. Over the years I realized it happens because we lack a system. They streamline maintenance and repair requests by inviting our co-investors and repairmen into the app to foster smooth communications between us, the tenants and the suppliers. Head over to Foliolens.com if you hate time-consuming admin tasks like tracking your property revenues, expenses, and due dates. So sign up for their newsletter at Foliolens.com and start managing your rental properties from anywhere in the world. Welcome to the Ideal Investor Show, where we talk about pathways and journeys to early retirement. And I have a really cool guest, basically a buddy in San Diego County, I should say. And his name is Adit Shah, and he is also called the House Bender. And for those of you who see us on video, you will see he has a wonderful House Bender hoodie on this today. So Adit, welcome to the Ideal Investor Show.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I read a little bit, like we said before we started the official recording, I read a little bit, and we are fellow military men, so to speak, because I retired from the Air Force after 22 years of service. So tell us a little bit what you did in the Navy before you became a real estate guru.
Totally. Yeah, Axel, you were an aviator, correct?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
I flew F-111s and Tornadoes and stuff like that.
Wow, yeah. Mine not so impressive. I was kind of the bottom of the bottom in the military, right? I was a Navy boatswain's mate. So we're kind of in charge of deck maintenance. And starting out in my job, we do a lot of the menial labor and kind of one of the most undesirable jobs in the Navy. So I went from doing that, worked my way up to E5, and that's when I got out. That's around the time that I discovered real estate and realized that I didn't want to stay in the military long term. I wanted to be in business for myself. So
that's cool. Real quick for those
military.
Adit, real quick for those that are not that familiar with the military, like E and O ranking system, is there? What's E5? What would people call that for, like in the movies?
Yeah, so in the Navy, that's like a petty officer second class. It'd be like the equivalent to like an Army or Marine Corps sergeant. So it's like a non-commissioned officer, one level above the first level of non-commissioned officers.
Cool. So it's Sergeant Adit then.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, cool. Thanks for clarifying. That helps people to get a little bit of an idea. Okay, cool. And so you decided long-term military is maybe not the right thing for you. And I read about it, but maybe it's a little nicer if you would just tell us a little bit, how did that transition into real estate work? Because I think your story is really inspiring and informative, especially for anybody. And let me say this before you start into your description. For anybody listening and hasn't done it yet, or for anybody who is connected to Adit and hears about our show here, I have created something we call the mindset manual that is actually found on the Ideal Wealth Grower YouTube channel, but also on the website, idealwealthgrower.com. And without going into much, because we want to mainly talk about you, Adit, but the main point is that I wrote the manual because there are so many people out there, not just in real estate, but in many other areas of life these days, with all this stuff, especially what's been happening the last 2 years, but even before, where so many people see themselves and feel as if they're victims, as if life is kind of happening to them, rather than really having a plan, having a goal, having a vision, being excited about something, and creating the necessary steps and the journey to reach those goals and accomplish these things and live into that passion and ultimately really get to do the things you like. And I always say, if you get to do that, like for the most part, what I'm doing, what we're doing here right now, and everything related to real estate, for me, is really not work. I'm super passionate about it. And that's why we have the manual, why we're talking today, Adit, is to get people at least out of that victim mindset into a creator mindset and then help along on the journey. So it seems to me that you did the Navy stuff but it wasn't really quite right, like you said. So can you talk a little bit on how did you then get into real estate and how did this transition actually occur and where are you now?
Totally, yeah. So blends in perfectly with what you said about victim versus taking ownership of your life. And so basically, I got out of the military. I was using my GI Bill, which those who are unfamiliar, it's a military benefit we get as post 9/11 veterans. We get to go to school and they give us a housing allowance. So I was living off my housing allowance. It was like $3,000 a month in San Diego. I was always living well below my means. I was big a saver. Early on in my military career, I spent a lot of money, did the whole credit card debt thing like most young enlisted do. And I learned from that early on not to do that. So I was well financially. And so I had a lot of time because I was going to school in the evenings and I had time during the day. And I had an interest in real estate and I discovered Bigger Pockets, which is an online real estate community. And it's like a social media network for real estate investors. So what I did was I blasted my cover letter and resume to every single real estate developer, not like flipper or property manager or agent. I had the audacity as a nobody to want to be a real estate developer. So I wanted to talk to developers only. So I sent out like close to 20 letters. No one responded. So I kept following up with every single person, sending them a message every week. Hey, it's Adit. I'll send them a picture of a ceiling fan or something. I didn't actually replace the ceiling fan, but I would say, hey, I just replaced the ceiling fan at a friend's house. And if you need help with any of your rentals or properties, I'm more than happy to help. One developer took me up on that. We met at a job site and I started doing small repairs for him for free, by the way. This is completely for free. And he started teaching me a little bit about real estate, basically exposing me to his projects, his business. And that ended up into me helping manage his whole portfolio of around 40 doors in San Diego County, taking management of a few of his projects, now partnering on deals, lending back and forth between each other. And it's been a really beautiful partnership. And because of that, I was able to gain the confidence and resources that I needed to go do deals on my own as well.
Very cool. So can you just describe a little bit for people who are not that familiar? What does a developer do? How would you describe if somebody were to say, Adit, I'm not really sure. What's a real estate developer? What are they doing and are there different kinds?
Yeah, totally. So there are different kinds, like you said, there is commercial, residential, industrial, of course, but then there's big and small. There's those big development companies that some of them are publicly traded and they're doing stuff like Riverwalk in Mission Valley in San Diego area, which is a huge mixed use, commercial, residential, that kind of stuff. And then there's kind of what we do, which is urban infill. So we'll take like a 4-unit property that's in zoning for 30 or 40 units and build those, or we'll take a house that's on a big parcel and subdivide it into 4 parcels and build 4 houses. Things like that is kind of what we focus on. But what kind of separates development from maybe some of the smaller projects is you're totally transforming the footprint of the structure that's there and you're taking that parcel to its highest and best use.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a beautiful description. One thing, maybe for those of you who follow us in either the podcast or YouTube content and so forth, or on social media, you know that I've created a series that has probably like 40 or 50 videos on it now called Terminology Explained, because there's a lot of terminology in the real estate industry and in the real estate investing industry. One of the things that we once touched on, and it sounds like a totally normal word that wouldn't necessarily resonate when you say, well, how is that a specific real estate term? And that's the word improvement. And it's more not because we don't know what an improvement is, but the question is, how does it apply? And why is it even, why do I bring it up right now in the context of a developer, as you had described, Adit? And it's interesting for anybody in the audience to say, okay, what does it have to do with it? Is when you look at the description, the official descriptions of anything that has to do with real estate in a very fundamental way, you find a piece of land generally. And as soon as this land is in some form of jurisdiction, so it's part of the city or it's part of the county or something like that, then the first question is it part of a master development plan, or is it just a piece of land that can be either owned by the government, publicly owned, or by private individuals? If it becomes part of a development plan, there's a term called annex, where like the city or the county can annex a piece of land So they would purchase it from the current owner if it's not already public land, and then basically extend the boundary of the city or the village or whatever it may be to include that piece of land. And then the master development plan, and this is where development starts coming in, actually says, okay, what do we want to do with this piece of land? And so, like you said, Adit, there is oftentimes like an area identified on this piece of land to say, okay, we want to do single family housing, which actually for anybody here listening from California, and you have probably seen this in other states as well, has become an issue in the last 20, 30 years, because a lot of the land, because there's a shortage of housing, was zoned for single family residence. And then when somebody says, I want to do a duplex, a fourplex or something, which used to be more common in the 60s, 70s, 80s, if it's not zoned like that, and if every house around it is a single family house, it used to be pretty hard to change the zoning. Now, how does this relate to developer? Is somebody who improves just the land, just the dirt, so to speak, by putting something of higher value on it. Because naturally, a piece of land, let's say you have 10 acres, or actually here, not far from where I live down the street, somebody bought 4 acres of land right at the corner of an intersection and then put 21 single family houses on it. But to be able to do this, this was just agriculturally zoned land. So he had to get a change, which, like you said, Adit, the developer first has to work with the community and with the authorities to get a change to single family residence, then get that approved, and then you can actually start get financing, break ground, and put these houses on, or like in your case, fill in a certain piece of land in the middle of an already existing zone. So that's a cool thing. One quick thing before we go back to Adit's story, I wanted to point out, a lot of listeners know that our suggestion and recommended strategy that I apply and that I mentor other people on is turnkey investing. And in a way, you could say turnkey investing is a form of development, because in this case, they're not really improving a piece of land to put something new on, at least in most cases, but they're improving the existing stock, so to speak, the existing houses, because they take anything from 1900 to about 1999, I would say, in that 100-year span. If it's not in a good condition, a turnkey provider would actually buy it as cheap as possible, then improve it by fully renovating it, and then putting it back on the market for investors like me, or maybe even Adit, and be able to actually get a fully renovated property, rent it out. And I always recommend, this is our strategy, for the investor to work with the turnkey provider, especially when they also manage that property. So when you say you're managing 40 doors for this developer now, what does that mean? And what are the things that you've learned from growing into that role, Adit?
Yeah, totally. So that's the other side of the house for me, is the property management side of the house, which has been an extremely valuable experience and really set me up for success in managing my own rentals. So basically, the stock of houses that we manage are mostly small multifamily. So 4 units and below, we have a couple 5 and up, but the biggest one is like 6 units. It's really everything that I've done and that I do. I started out doing the actual repairs, right? But now I screen tenants, I offer leases, I set prices, I analyze the rental market, I analyze the economic diversity in a specific communities within San Diego, which is, I'm sure people are doing for turnkey investment as well, analyzing the economic diversity. What is the kind of tenants that we're going to get in this area? What kind of rents can we get in this area? Making sure we increase rents every year so we're not losing out on revenue, stuff like that. So I learned very much from the ground up. I started at the ground, being actually in the houses, doing the repairs, learning what the homes are consisted of. And then I worked my way up to actually learning how to run the business, run a real estate rental business, and how to maximize that business.
Yeah, very cool. Thank you for describing that. So I have 2 main questions about that I believe our audience would be interested in. The first one revolves a little bit around this whole issue of how to maintain the property after I, as an investor, or anybody listening as an investor, has bought a property. And with the property management team, I always recommend that should come ideally from the turnkey provider. Now the tenant has been found, the tenant is in the property. And I always say, it's better when the property has been looked over and checked and inspected, and anything that needs to be done repaired before you put the new tenant or any tenant in there. So when something happens, the one thing that a lot of our people, the people I mentor, the people that contact us ask is if the cash flow on the property is very limited, which is typical in the first few years, how do I maintain a reasonably predictable cash flow when there's repairs eating into my cash flow? Do you have any kind of suggestions or things that you guys do on kind of making that more predictable and limiting the amount of maintenance?
Totally. So for one, like you said, we create a housing product that is going to be able to withstand the tenants. So you want to go in there and harden stuff. So vinyl plank flooring, don't cheap out on anything. Vinyl plank flooring, don't cheap out on getting cheap faucets. Like in San Diego, we have hard water. So if you get the cheapo Amazon faucets for $30, you're going to end up replacing them anyways and spending the same as the $180 delta. So things like that, the preventative maintenance, I call it. And then once you place the tenant, you kind of set some expectations. Like, we're a super easy to deal with company if you take care of the home. If you start neglecting the home, that's when we're going to have problems. Obviously, it's said in a more professional and polite way because we are polite about it. But we set that expectation, like the way to get the most out of your housing experience is to take care of the place and maybe fix the small things on your own. So I don't personally do this, but I have seen people put in their leases like repairs, of course, in accordance with your state and local laws. If you're allowed to, maybe repairs under $100 that don't involve health and safety are the responsibility of the tenants. I'm talking about like, if your drain gets clogged up, just call the drain service yourself.
Yeah, and there is a fine line, right? There is this term for our audience. You have probably heard this if you ever were, and most of us have been a tenant at some point. There is the term wear and tear, right? Where you can say if you use something, then it's not that you're being held responsible for the fact that you're using it, but maintaining it in the sense of not doing anything to it that is necessarily harmful. So like you mentioned the issue I did with the hard water, right? There is relatively environmentally friendly stuff you can get at Lowe's or Home Depot or so forth. If you see that there is like, residue kind of collecting on the faucet on the outside, it starts turning white or crusty or stuff like that. Well, instead of just saying, well, I'm just a tenant, I just let that go and go and go until it's totally clogged. And I don't know that that is necessarily a matter of the more expensive, less expensive. It's just a matter of, are you doing something about it to keep it in check or not? And that is not something where that would be the same like to say, okay, I live here, but I don't clean. Right. Yeah. So for me, I think this wear and tear is a matter of needs to be spelled out and is a matter of the relationship, either with a property management company, if you look at it from the perspective of the investor, or directly between property management and tenants, to kind of give examples that are practical. The same thing, like if you know that for some reason and I'm, by the way, with you, right? I always say, let's have some sort of vinyl plank or hardwood floors or tile or something rather than carpet. But for the few cases where there still is carpet, well, it's not forbidden for a tenant to get a carpet clean, right? It's not that you always have to do that is something as normal wear and tear. And there is a certain aspect to, okay, nobody says, tenant, you did something wrong by using the carpet. But if you, for example, have something going on in the backyard and you're dragging all kinds of dirt into the place multiple times and the carpet is dirty, then that's not normal wear and tear. So there's a little bit of a fine line in that area. And thank you, Adit, for describing that. One quick thing, and I would really love your opinion about it. I've been trying and failed miserably so far because our investments are out of state and it's a little harder to get beyond suggesting something to property management, especially when they have a larger portfolio, and go from that suggestion to the actual implementation. One thing that I think would be a wonderful thing going forward, and maybe you would be the first one here where you and I can do this together to implement it, is every time there is a renovation or an improvement, like we said earlier, on a property or on a location, there's a whole bunch of stuff that typically gets put in. It's for the vinyl plank, it's the doorknobs and stuff. It might be new cabinets in the kitchen, it might be appliances, it might be light fixtures, ceiling fans, faucets, stuff. And you can make a huge long list. And one thing that I've oftentimes pointed out is every time you go to Home Depot, to Lowe's, to Best Buy, to any other place like these, nowadays there's actually a rumor that they make more money with the warranties than with the actual profit on the items. But from an investor perspective or property management perspective, I feel it would be so smart to say for every one of these items, I pay these $5, $8, $9, $12. extra for the extended warranty, right? And then for each property, you have a binder with all these purchases and all these little extended warranty certificates, so to speak. So if then something actually happens in the first year, 2, 3, and in some cases for other items like water heaters or stuff like that, even to 10 years, instead of having to have the investor or the owner have to pay, it would be covered. Right. I did, just as an example, a little run. I created a list of everything I could imagine that would go into a property to renovate it, and then went to Lowe's and said, okay, how much is the insured? If I were to buy extended warranty on everything, that came out, depending on all the things included, between $1,000 and $1,500. But if you think about it in the context of the purchase, you pay that $1,000 and for the next 3 to 5 years, there is nothing you have to pay on maintenance because it's all covered. What do you think about that idea, Adit?
Totally. And it's interesting because I had 3 water heaters. So we put Rheem water heaters in everything,
Right.
and we use the same model. And that's another thing to talk about, is standardizing your equipment. But we use the Rheem water heaters, and I had 2 of them go out around the same time within the same week. One of them manufacture date was 2017 and the other one was 2019. Now, the Rheem claims to have a 5 or 6 year warranty. I think it's 5, but they will not cover it if it wasn't installed professionally, right? And it doesn't have a sediment trap for the gas, or they have a million ways to get out of the warranty. But for one of them, I had purchased the Home Depot plan, and Home Depot's no questions asked. They'll give you one right on the spot, right? So like you said, so worth it. Definitely worth it. And these things are supposed to last, like you said, 8, 10 plus years, but they went out in year 2 or 3, and it happens all the time, more often than people think. And especially if your rentals are out of state, just spend the extra. I think it's less than $100 for the warranty. Just spend it, because all they have to do is take it back to Home Depot. They'll give you a new one right on the spot.
And that is exactly what the turnkey provider's property manager could do as well, right? And if you really look at the list of all the things that go into a full-on renovation, it's a pretty lengthy list, but the amount of money in extra. And there's a beautiful little thing that I like to say, and maybe this is something that you want to take to your developer as an idea, is in most cases, at least for on our side, I'm pretty sure you do the same thing. We finance the property, right? Would you agree?
You said finance the property?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so we finance a property. So I always say we're looking for 20-80, right? 20% down, 80% finance. Well,
Correct.
what does that mean if you say, okay, well, all these little extended warranties on every little piece that goes into the place, let's just, for sake of argument, say cost $2,000. That's more than it probably costs, but just for the warranty. Well, 80% of that comes from the bank. And ultimately,
you're right.
your tenant would pay for it through the rent, and you pay 20%. You pay $400 to have peace of mind for the next at least 3 years, and for most items, probably longer than that. That is definitely worth it, right? So I just wanted to touch briefly on that little bit of an aspect. So that's the renovation side. Now, the other side is, you said that you're operating for this developer here in the San Diego area. I wanted to ask, are your properties the ones that you are doing on your own here as well, or are there somewhere else?
Yes, everything that I've done as a principal, partner, lender, or on my own has been in San Diego. So yeah, this is kind of my neck of the woods.
Right. Like, so you have definitely one big advantage by being here. You can basically take care of a lot of things yourself and don't need to pay somebody else on that. One thing that we oftentimes face, and it's San Diego, but it's pretty much all up and down California, anything that's kind of like within driving distance of the coast, is what I'm harping on a lot is performance. So what are you doing, or what have you found to be working to get proper performance when you look at, like, I think I last looked, it's like on average 650 or so for houses here in our area. If you have a single family, would you agree, somewhere in that area?
Yeah, and performance in terms of,
Well, I'm always saying,
cash flow.
if I were to buy a property for, let's just say, around number 600,000, the performance that I would be looking for would be $4,800 to $6,000 in rent.
Yes.
Now, for most intents and purposes, that's not going to happen. And that is to be between 0.8 and 1% of the purchase price in monthly rent. So can you talk a little bit of what you're able to get here in our area?
Totally. So in San Diego County, we look for a 0.7 or 0.8% rule. And it's not, like you already alluded to, it's not possible with just any home off the market. And this is where people kind of fall into two categories, right? There's the people who have the maybe financial resources, but they don't have the time. I think that those people are better suited for either passive investments, such as what you're doing, which is turnkey investing out of state, or maybe perhaps lending or taking a passive role in San Diego, which you're kind of giving up a little bit of ownership there. But in order to get those high cash flow numbers, they are possible in San Diego County. It's not easy. You have to make major improvements and you have to buy for significantly below retail. So we're talking about a lot of work that goes into being able to force appreciation and income to a point to achieve desirable returns. Very difficult in just traditionally just buying a home and renting it out. Not possible in San Diego. It is possible if maybe you buy a home for a little bit below retail at an ADU, but like I said, there's going to be some level of work that goes into that, work and resources that need to be put in to get those returns.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's extremely refreshing, Adit, that you're acknowledging that. So I think one thing that we have to learn when we're working and operating in these higher price markets is that you have to have an even longer arch or perspective and look at the combination of maybe you can find a place that would ultimately retail for 600 or 650, but you get it for 400 because it's completely like halfway falling apart, not structurally, but otherwise, like
Right.
dilapidated and neglected and stuff like that. And then with, let's say, 100,000, actually all in 500, but now you have a value of 650. So the equity is actually in it and you can probably pull most of your own investment out of it again and then rent it, maybe not for 4,800, but something more like 3,500 or 3,800 or something like that. And then that ratio works if you're willing to wait long enough, because the beauty of our area, I think we would both agree, is that without even doing anything, it's been, I think, like right on average 8% appreciation every year, just because there's so many people wanting to live here, understandably, and there's just not enough inventory, right? So that is kind of built in, even though you do enforce the appreciation initially, but even beyond that, just the average keeps creeping up. I mean, I remember when I first came here, it was more like closer to 500, and I thought that was pretty high already. And now
Yeah.
it's 650 and keeps climbing, right? So a friend of mine across the street said the other day, "Are you aware that we're going to be millionaires?" I was like, "What do you mean? Are we?" And he said, "Well, it's just going to take a few more years, and then as all the boats are rising with the tide, then our houses will actually make it across that line, not because they got better or anything like that, just because the average keep increasing." So that's a great insight, and thank you for sharing that. Now, one of the things that also comes with that is you need a strong team. Would you agree, Adit? Because I think if somebody says, okay, I want to do a deal like this, and the end result is, let's say, a $500,000 investment on a 2080, you have to have $100,000. And that's not necessarily possible for everybody to risk, even if they had it, rather than saying, okay, I can get 3 houses somewhere in the Midwest for the same amount of investment. So one of the last few things that we asked all the guests are a few of our common questions. So I want to use 2 for today. The first one would be, are there any particular people, and maybe since you already talked about that developer, let's exclude the developer that you're working for, any particular people that you admire and would love to meet? And if so, who is it and why?
Yeah, I would really love to meet any of the bigger pockets hosts. So like Brandon Turner, David Green.
Mr. Beard?
Yeah, the beardy Brandon. I think those guys are great. I love what they're doing. I love their message and the fact that they've made real estate accessible to the masses, right? Something that has been historically reserved for the super wealthy. People like me who are arguably nobody can come into this business and make something for themselves. So that's beautiful. And I really admire that.
Yeah, I don't like somebody calling him or herself nobody. I think you weren't born a real estate investor, but you made yourself into one, right?
Totally. Well said.
And making oneself into something is, I believe, something that we, and you especially, have every right to be proud of and be a great role model and example for people. I also like Brandon a lot, mainly because I think some of the things he says are so applicable for most people. For example, this thing with his daughter, right? Like when his daughter was born, he decided to find a fourplex that needed a lot of renovation and stuff like that. But the idea was, I buy this is probably not the last baby we're going to have. And then by the time the babies get ready to go to college, these properties will have appreciated in value and will be paying enough income, because they're probably going to be paid off by the time, if you put them on 15-year mortgages, they're going to be paid off in 15 years. And then each unit is paying for college for the kids. I think that's just an amazingly smart plan. And depending on where you are, I mean, you can't probably do it easily in San Diego as is right off the bat, but you can go, like we suggest, in other locations and start at a smaller level. And if appreciation works on an 18-year, if you say at 18 or 19, they're going to go to college, on that time horizon with appreciation and payoff through the rent, you have every reasonable expectation that you're going to have either a well appreciated property or a cash flow property that pays for your kids' college easily. Those kind of things that Bigger Pockets puts out, and Brandon actually started this whole BRRRR strategy and so forth, is really great. Cool. So then the other question I want to ask you, Adit, to close out today is, if you had a time machine, you could go forward, backward, any way you wanted in the space-time continuum, where would you go and why?
I'm sure you hear this one a lot, but I would go back to anywhere, anytime in the past and buy more real estate.
Okay.
Specifically, the earlier the better. So yeah,
Okay.
I would go back in time period and just buy more when I, especially like in my personal life, maybe from the moment that I could have actually qualified for a loan, which was when I made E5 in the military. I crossed the income threshold to be able to qualify for a loan to buy a house. I would have just bought a house. Something as simple as that. Just, you're not going to regret that. If you have a long-term vision and you buy in such a way where your expenses are more than covered, you're not going to regret that decision.
No, absolutely. I mean, I've heard that, by the way, you're right. I did it many times, and people say, I want to go back to my 19-year-old self or 20-year-old self or something like that. I've actually wondered, the first person that would come on our show and would say, I want to actually go to when my parents were young and see if I can find some kind of information. Because, I mean, if we really think about it, the people, I mean, nowadays we always talk about billionaires and stuff like that, right? But even in like 1920, 1930, 1950, 60 and so forth, there were very wealthy people in relation to what was considered wealthy at the time. And most of them were real estate investors, right? If they made any kind of money in any kind of business, they always looked at, okay, where can we put our money where it will be relatively safe and continue to appreciate for generations? And they always put it in real estate. I've oftentimes wondered for myself, since you brought it up with going back to your younger self, if there would be a way to say, can I get my young parents to learn about those investments that the wealthy did when they were young, so they could have taught me from the get-go, not when I'm 20, but right from the start, right? To say, hey, we didn't do it, or we trying to do it, and here's what we are trying to accomplish and why, and you can learn from that. So we would already be conditioned, right? We wouldn't even have to have somebody come back from the future and tell us. We would already have learned it, because I think parenting is a strong thing. And I know I'm way older than you and can tell you, the older you get, the more you start realizing that these things that parents said or grandparents said, not so much what their lifestyle was, but some of those core statements, like you said, frugality, you fell into this kind of trap of credit cards and stuff like that because external life made that sound reasonable to consume. And luckily you caught yourself quickly and early and fixed it and realized there's a much better path, a much better journey to earlier retirement, to wealth, to independence, to freedom, all those kind of points. But many, many people, when they didn't have the parenting and they didn't have the access, and I think the military is somewhat helpful in that context as well, then they go down this rabbit hole so deep that it takes them a decade to dig out again. Okay, great. So young Adit would have learned what to do. And I mean, you're not that old, so it's not that far back, right?
Not too.
One thing I want to give you a little bit of an opportunity, if people want to reach out to you and say, hey, Adit, that was really inspiring what you did and with your military service and so forth, how can they get a hold of you and maybe learn from you on how you got to where you are now?
Totally. So my website is housebender.com, and my Instagram is housebender, @housebender. And for anyone who's military affiliated, especially if you're military affiliated, I'm always more than happy to get on a phone call, message back and forth, whatever you need, I'm here to support you. And that goes for everyone, but my inbox does get full really quick. So if you're military affiliated, you'll get answered first. If you have any questions about what I did, what I do, and how I can help you in your real estate journey. I don't sell any courses or anything, just really looking to add value. More than happy to help anyone. Feel free to reach out.
Yeah, thank you, Adit. And that's exactly my philosophy. And that's why I love to have you had on the show today, because I don't have any courses or stuff. All the content on YouTube and so forth on the website is free. I do the mentoring, which I think is the best way for somebody to get to the goals and the steps on the journey faster than discovering it all by themselves. So Adit, thank you again for coming on the show. It was really awesome to talk to you. And I want to reiterate, I really am inspired to see that people like you, fellow military members, can get out of the service and make something of themselves. And I hope you're really proud of what you accomplished.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure being here and speaking to you.
All right. Thank you. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Ideal Investor Show. More info and the links we mentioned during the show are in the show notes, or you can go to our website at idealwealthgrower.com and sign up for the Apple Podcast link. And if you like to talk to me, sign up for a strategy call. Hopefully you want to share what you learned with your network and bring more people in. We are really eager to hear your comments. And until next time, be well, stay safe, and ciao.